Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We're diving into more FastAPI goodness today. And in our last session, if you remember, in the section 1, we built a simple Hello World API, and now it's time to level up. Okay, so we're going to level up it together in this session, in this video, and it's also gonna take just 10 minutes to learn the section 2 of our complete FastAPI course. What we're going to do, we're going to add a query parameters, create a post endpoint, and even use a little in-memory database to store some data. It's still beginner friendly, but you'll see how powerful FastAPI can get. Okay, so let's jump in. And from now, session 2 starts. Alright, so right there in the Explorer panel of Visual Studio Code, I have created a new file called section 2. And inside this file, I'm going to start with what we had last time and built on it. So for example, we need to import FastAPI and set up the app variable to declare our API, and just like before, here's the foundation. So I'm going to import the FastAPI from FastAPI. I'm going to import the FastAPI class, and here I'm going to declare, or I'm going to define a variable and initialize our FastAPI class to it. Okay, so I'm going to declare a variable called app and initialize it with the class that we have imported from the FastAPI, which is our library or our Python framework that we want to create our APIs using it. Okay, so at this point we just have created our API. There we go. Nice and familiar. Okay, we've imported FastAPI and created app instance, and this is the same starting point. But we're about to make it way more interesting. Okay, so let's add some data to work with the next steps that we want to focus on. To make this fun, let's pretend we've got a little database. Okay, we're pretending that we got a little database. Actually, there's no real database. We want to use in-memory database that I think we're going to talk about it later in this video. So it's just a list in a memory for now, and nothing fancy, but it let us store and fetch some items. Here's how it's set up. Okay, so here I'm going to define a list, an in-memory list, and pretend like this is our real database. But guys, this is not our real database. Okay, so I'm going to define a list called items and give it a value like, I don't know, apple, banana, and cherry, for example. I don't like cherry, so I'm going to use orange. Okay, so this is simple, right? We've got a list called items with a few fruits like apple, banana, and orange. Think of this as our tiny database, but remember that this is not our actual database. Okay, and so this is a list of our items, and we'll use it to show off some cool endpoints soon. Okay, so let's start with a get endpoint that uses query parameters. Okay, let's go and build this. In our third step, now we have to update our get endpoint, and instead of just saying hello world in the previous section that we just using our hello world, in this section, in section 2, we want to let the users ask for an item by its index, like give me item 1 or item 2 or item 3 based on our list items, and then using a query parameter we give our users the best response. Okay, so here's the code. Let's just code it. So here we have to define an endpoint. Okay, so I'm going to use @sign and then called our API variable, and the HTTP method that we're going to use, for example, I want to use the get HTTP method, and the path of our endpoint in string, so I'm going to set items, and then here we have to define the function that going to be called when our user explored this endpoint on our API. So here I'm going to define a function called, for example, get item, and this function is going to return, not going to return the items. We can just return the items and see the result just right now. Okay, so for this I'm going to open up terminal, active my virtual environment. So I'm going to just call my virtual environment env /scripts /activate.ps1 and start our server. Sorry, section _2 -app reload, save the changes and start our server. And right there we can see that actually here we have nothing on our root URL, but if I going to the items endpoint and search or explore this endpoint, you can see that our response is a list. That is our tiny database, but remember guys, this is not our real database. We pretend like this is a database, okay? So remember this. And we can see a list of our items inside our pretended database, okay? But we want our users to choose an item inside our database based on an index. For example, if a user asks for the first item inside our database, for example, if a user sent a parameter 1, we return apple, parameter 2 return banana, and the third one, if the user sent, for example, items number 3, we have to return orange, for example, not found. So how we can do it using the FastAPI, here's how. Here we need to change this function, okay, to do the functionality that we need to make the users see their items based on the index that we want. How we can do that, guys? We have to define a function inside our function get item. We have to define a parameter called index, define its type, for example an int, and a default value. So here we have defined an index as a parameter for our function, and its type of this parameter and the default value of it, okay? And now we have to define our condition, okay? What will be our condition here? I'm going to say if the index of our item is less than 0, okay, or the index is more or equal than the length of our items inside our tiny database, then you have to return a string, just a simple string called error index out of range, else if the index is not less than 0 or the index is not greater or equal than the length of our actual items inside our database. What we have to do here, we have to return the items based on the index that the user returns, that the user sends us in the parameters of our his request to the server, okay? We return the index inside our database. I'm going to just say return the item and the index of the user, item index. So we can return it in a dictionary, so I'm going to just return it like items and list of items, okay? And actually here right now, if I restart the server and go to this URL and refresh, so right there you see that there's nothing, okay? So right now we're going to the items and we just see an apple, okay? See the path, there's nothing, we just see an apple, okay? So what we have to do here, actually here, if we want to see the results based on our items, we have defined an index inside the function that's going to be called whenever a user explored or searched this endpoint in our API or in our server, okay? So here we have to send a query parameter inside our path here, we have to say that items send a query and set the index equal to, for example, the first number. Now, like you see here, we have the banana because the index starts from 0, not from 1. Okay, so when we set the index to 1, we will receive the second item inside our database, which is the banana. When we set the index in the default value equal to 0, we can see the apple, which is the first item inside our database. And if we set our item to orange, which is the third item inside our database, or our tiny database or pretended database, we can see that the index is 2 because 0, 1, and 2. And we set the index to 2, and in the response we will see that we see an orange as a response from our tiny pretended database. So I think it's enough for this section, and it's actually cool, doesn't it?